Section 3.1, Adding and Subtracting, like fractions. Fractions can only be added or subtracted if they name the same parts of a whole. Another way of saying this is, to add or subtract fractions, they have to be like fractions, or have the same denominators. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to draw a picture here, and I'm going to draw a picture of a square, and I'm going to divide it up into eighths. I'm going to shade in one of these so that I have 1/8 shown, and I'm going to represent that with 1/8. I'm going to draw another square. I'm going to try to make it the same size. I'm going to try and divide it up into eighths again, so that all those eighth pieces in both are exactly the same. You get the idea as I'm doing that. And let's say that now I want to add 3/8 to that. So I am going to shade in 3/8 of that as well. Here's 1, 2, 3. You can see that altogether I have 1/8 plus the 3/8, which gives me a total of 4/8 of that square being shaded in. The pieces were the same size. They were all eighths, so I could add them together. Now I have 4/8 of it shaded in all together. If I add those two together, if I were to take this amount and shade it over here, I have 4/8, which if I wanted to I could simplify and say, well, half of the square is shaded in as well, but we'll get into that later on. The one thing that I cannot do is I cannot add something like eighths and fifths. So let me go through and do this again. Here's another square, not very well drawn, but you'll have the idea. And once again, I am going to shade in. I'll shade in 1/8. Let's say I have another square. This time, instead of dividing it up into eighths, I'm going to divide this square up in half. Well, this shows 1/8. This shows 1/2. I can't directly add those numbers because the sizes of the pieces are not exactly the same. Now I could do some manipulation, and we'll talk about that in the next section, but I cannot just add up 1/8 plus 1/2. In other words, sometimes I see people that have 1/8 plus 1/2, and they say, well, that answer is 2/10 because they're adding these up and they're adding these up. You cannot do that. In order to add fractions together or subtract fractions, they have to have the same denominators. So we are going to get away from drawing pictures, and let's just say that you have 1/5 plus 3/5. Simply, in order to add that, first of all, they do have the same size pieces. They are both fifths. So I can just add the numerators together. 1 plus 3 gives me 4, and I still have the same size piece. I have fifths, so my answer is 4/5. Be careful as you're going through. Here's another example, 3/12 plus 5/12. Once again, I can add those two together because I have the same denominator of 12. I'm going to add the numerators, and I'm going to get 8/12. But in this particular section, you do need to make sure that if you have a fraction that can be simplified at the end, you do need to simplify that. So I'm taking a look at 8/12, and I'm saying, is there a common factor with 8 and 12? And there is. I can divide by 4/4. So when I divide by 4/4, I get a final answer of 2/3. Remember, 2/3 and 8/12 are exactly the same, except 2/3 is the simplified fraction, or the fraction in lowest terms. And you need to make sure that you put all final answers in lowest terms. Sometimes when adding fractions, you might get an improper fraction for an answer. So here's an example. 5 plus 8 is 13. I have ninths. for the denominator for both of those, so the final answer is 13/9 as an improper fraction. But remember, you need to go through, you cannot leave it as an improper fraction, so I'm going to divide 9 by 13. 9 goes into 13 one time. 9 times 1 is 9. I subtract, I get 4. So my fraction would be 4/9, and my final answer would be 1 4/9. Subtracting fractions works exactly the same way. I have to have the same size pieces, so the denominators have to be the same. So if I have 4/5 minus 1/5, I am just going to go through and subtract the numerators. 4 minus 1 gives me 3. The final answer to that is 3/5. So addition and subtraction work exactly the same way. As long as the denominators are the same, you are just either adding or subtracting. Sometimes you might need to add or subtract more than just two fractions. So if you had 1/9 plus 4/9 plus 5/9, as long as the fractions, the denominators of the fractions are all the same, and in this case they're all ninths, I can just add those numerators together. 1 plus 4 plus 5 gives me 10, so I have 10/9. Remember, I can't leave it 10/9 because that is an improper fraction, so I'm going to change that by dividing 10 divided by 9. 9 goes into 10 one time. I am going to multiply. 10 minus 9 gives me 1. So my fraction is 1/9, and the final answer to that is 1 1/9. Earlier, we also talked about following order of operations. So if you are given a problem like this one, 7/12 plus 3/12 subtract 1/12, once again, I have the same denominator, so I am just going to go straight across and add and subtract. And remember, when I do that, because it's adding and subtracting, I'm just going to go in order from left to right. So when I do that, 7 plus 3 gives me 10, minus 1 gives me 9, so I get 9/12. 9/12, though, is not in lowest terms. 9 and 12 both have a common factor of 3. So I am going to divide by 3/3, and my final answer to this is 3/4. Adding and subtracting fractions that have the same denominators is pretty straightforward. Just make sure that at the end you change any improper fractions to mixed numbers, and that all fractions are in lowest terms. Please let me know if I can help in any way as you work through the homework in this section. Thank you.